While everyone wants to talk about tariffs, we are going to talk about taxes. If you live in the state of South Carolina, there is something very interesting happening in Columbia. In fact, many people would be curious to know that the South Carolina Republicans have now proposed a sweeping change to our current state income tax laws. Will they get it done? I don't know, but we're going to talk about it. So what is happening right now is quite interesting. South Carolina has currently been working towards reducing taxes for a while now on the state income level. But recently, Republicans have proposed a massive change to how state income tax is calculated here in South Carolina. Currently, we have a progressive tax system. And the way that progressive taxes work is that as you make more income or as you have more taxable income, tax rates increase. Our federal income tax code works the same way. So South Carolina is not necessarily too different than how we pay on federal taxes. What is different is the rate that we pay. South Carolina currently has marginal rates that range from 0 up to 6.2% being the top marginal rate. The way that we get there is actually quite simple. South Carolina allows us to use the federal deductions and get to your federal taxable income as the starting point. So they take your adjusted gross income or your AGI, they apply the standard or itemized deductions, and they get to your federal taxable income. From there, they run your taxable income through the current brackets. There's a 0% bracket, there's a 3% bracket, and then the top bracket is at 6.2%. You get to the 6.2% bracket pretty quickly in the state of South Carolina. So that is one interesting detail that will impact a lot of people and how they view this bill. What is being proposed is that we move away from the current system and we implement a new structure. Lawmakers in Columbia, especially Republicans, are saying South Carolina should decouple itself from the way that federal income taxes work and use our own system to determine how we want to tax income here in the state of South Carolina. So instead of starting with federal taxable income, what they want to do is they want to start with your AGI or your adjusted gross income. This would eliminate the ability for South Carolinians to use the itemized or standard deduction to bring their income down to the taxable amount or the taxable income and then start the calculation. So that is going to be really interesting because what it starts with is a higher taxable income figure than what many people are currently using. South Carolina does want to apply a South Carolina income adjustment deduction that will be phased out based on income. For single filers, they will allow a $6,000 deduction if your income is below $30,000. From $30,000 to $40,000, that deduction will phase out. For married couples filing jointly, you get a $12,000 deduction, but that deduction is going to phase out in income levels from $60,000 to $80,000. Ultimately, what South Carolina lawmakers want to do is they want to move us off of the progressive system and onto a flat tax system. The new tax or the flat tax that they are proposing is 3.99%. So instead of doing the old calculation, which starts with federal AGI, you get your itemized deduction, your standard deduction to move you down to taxable income. And then you go through these progressive tax rates for South Carolina. They want to do away with that. And they want to say, hey, here's what we want to do. We want to implement our own system. We're going to start with your adjusted gross income. You're allowed to have a South Carolina income adjustment deduction that will phase out. After those deductions, whether you receive them or not, we're now going to simply apply a flat tax. It should be fairly simple and straightforward, but like anything in taxes, there is always room for debate. And of course, there are going to be people that are very upset with this bill. So let's explain a little bit about what may be happening and the reasoning or the rationale behind this proposal. Republican lawmakers, especially those who are strong proponents of the bill, claim that we have a really large tax base problem here in South Carolina. So tax base, what is that? Well, any state based on its population or a country based on its population, you determine your tax base by basically the population and the percentage of people that are paying into the system, or basically the people who live there versus the people who are actually paying tax. So South Carolina right now, by some measures, there are claims that we have roughly 50% of people who live in South Carolina who pay zero state income tax. So we have a large percentage of our population who are not paying anything into the system. Republican lawmakers argue that this is a problem and it's not fair because you have a disproportionate amount of the tax burden falling on a very small percentage of the population. So what they propose is that by doing this type of reform, what they're going to do is broaden the tax base. Now, I won't get into an economics lesson with you, but what I will tell you is that if you study any traditional economics textbooks or any traditional lessons or learning on economics, one of the things about taxes is that as taxes go up, you tend to receive actually less revenue per capita than you would if you had a lower tax system that had more people paying into it. And the reason why is that as taxes increase, people seek to find ways to defer paying tax or even avoid paying taxes. Those are the legal ways of tax management. Tax avoidance and tax deferral are legal. Tax evasion, of course, is illegal. But what happens is as you have higher and higher tax rates, people with those higher incomes look for ways to either get deductions, deferrals, or to avoid paying taxes through various strategies and mechanics that are available to them. As taxes are lowered and you broaden out the tax base, you tend to have more people paying into the system, and those higher income earners are not as incentivized to find ways to defer taxes. In theory, the idea is that if we broaden out the tax base, we will in fact increase tax revenues over time because more people are paying into the system and fewer people are incentivized to defer paying taxes. Now, the problem with broadening out the tax base, and this is going to be the main talking point for those people who would oppose this type of legislation, is that in fact it will likely cause some people to have an increase in taxes. For example, if someone or a worker currently is paying zero state income tax because they either have really high itemized deductions or their standard deduction wipes out the majority of their taxable income, they would likely not pay much or any state income tax under the current system. Under the new system, they may have to pay something. And if you've paid nothing and you now pay something, by default, you've had a tax increase. And there are going to be a lot of opponents that say, this is not fair. You're actually raising taxes on lower income earning individuals so that higher income earning individuals can actually receive tax relief. It all depends on your frame of reference and your worldview on how you look at that. I would say most likely your politics are going to color how you view the taxation situation here in South Carolina. But what I will say is that for a lot of people, a flat tax makes a ton of sense, because when we talk about fairness, if everybody pays the same rate with the same deductions, therefore, you tend to see more, quote, fairness. In fact, many people argue that flat taxes are the fairest way to do taxes. But again, politics gets in the way, and there's going to be arguments on both sides. And the final bill and what may ultimately be approved is still going to be up for debate. But right now, the key thing that I want everyone to understand is that we may, in fact, see significant tax reform here in South Carolina. A few of the things that I've read so far is they intend to, or Republicans, this is a Republican sponsored bill, they want to preserve the current tax deductions and tax statuses of seniors and people who are like retired veterans and so forth that live in the state. But what their ultimate aim is they want to broaden out the tax base, have more people paying into the system. There are going to be some people, most likely higher income earners, who do see some tax relief. There are going to be some people who see themselves pay a little more in taxes. Obviously, as I said earlier in the video, if you currently pay zero and now you have to pay something, by default, you've had a tax increase. The ultimate aim for this bill is they want to, again, Republican lawmakers who sponsor this bill, they want to see a flat tax which will allow South Carolina to become extremely competitive in the Southeast, to compete for not only business, but to be an attractive place to want to relocate and live and be part of our way of life here in the Carolinas. To do that, they say that we need to have a fairer system and something that is attractive to people who currently, and businesses who currently do not live here. Again, one of the ideas they have is that if they can grow revenues, and there is a mechanism that they've defined in the bill by growing revenues, they actually want to see the flat tax rate reduced down even further. But that reduction is going to be contingent upon whether or not they meet these revenue goals. So it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. There's going to be pretty significant arguments on both sides. As I was researching for this bill, of course, I've already seen news media articles where they've pointed out this person's going to receive a tax increase and this person who makes substantially more income is likely going to see a tax reduction. And then, quote unquote, how is that fair? As I said before, we're talking about the ideology of a tax base issue versus a tax rate issue. Republicans are arguing that there are too few or too low a percentage of people who live in South Carolina actually paying into the system. And South Carolina is not a very high income state per capita. So what they want to do is they want to create a flat tax, which will actually broaden out our tax base, have more people paying something, give some tax relief to some people, but ultimately they want it to be more fair across the board. How this ultimately ends up is going to be anybody's guess, but it's going to be interesting to watch the various debating sides go back and forth, because how they view tax policy is largely going to be colored by who they are arguing for and who they are arguing against. So I'll leave that to you to watch the debates unfold. But if you live here in South Carolina and you are retired here in South Carolina, this could be significant for you, because everyone that pays taxes should be very interested in the fact that they are looking at significant tax reform here in South Carolina, which ultimately could be a benefit for all of us. How it plays out is anybody's guess, but I wanted you to know that this bill is actually on the table and many Republicans are strongly supporting it. It looks to be a promising venture that we will see some type of tax relief or some type of tax reform here this year. So keep your eyes out for this bill. If you've got any questions, feel free to shoot me an email or let me know. I'd be happy to research it further, but I wanted to put this on your radar because if you live here and if you're retired here, this is likely going to affect you. All right. So hope that made sense. If you got any questions, let me know. Drop me a comment and let me know what you thought about the video, and we'll talk to you next time.